Hey, it's Wednesday, December 17th. I'm Jake Ward. This is the Rip Current. We look at the big invisible forces at work on us. And today we're going to be talking about the strange schizophrenia that has gripped the United States when it comes to the issue of AI data centers. These are the huge, Costco-sized buildings that could soon be pulling as much power as the entire city of Philadelphia, and the weird political bedfellows that the fight about these has made. We're going to look at all of that and more in today's episode. Okay, so you probably know by now that every time you put in a request for a sexy kitty cat in a bikini or your wedding vows, right, you are triggering somewhere a rack of servers to fire up and crunch through the math necessary to make that possible. You probably also know that there is electricity required to power all those servers, and you probably also understand that there's a certain amount of cooling that has to go into that requires water. You may not know that the dominant way that gets done right now, the thing that's in fashion, is evaporative cooling. So that means water being vaporized and sprayed in that room such that it'll never be collected again. It's going to be lost to evaporation, and that's it. So as a result, the threat that this kind of always-on megalith building poses to the amount of money you pay for electricity and the amount of water available to you in your municipality is causing huge state and regional and municipal protests, and in some cases laws that are beginning to affect the growth of this stuff. So we've seen, for instance, in Maryland, for instance, a new data center was just halted in October, so officials there could investigate the health and environmental impacts of that. In Northern Virginia, which has really been the center of the data center world, residents last month openly protested the arrival of a new building. And this week, in a story that sort of created a lot of national attention, a Phoenix suburb called Chandler shot down what was planned to be a very big data center there. And the vice mayor of it said to Politico, asked the rhetorical question, what's in it for Chandler? And what we know is in it, right, is, of course, rising electricity costs. Bloomberg just did a big analysis of how the wholesale prices for Americans have risen as much as 276% in regions where AI data centers are going in over the last 5 years. And even those places that are not hosting a data center are seeing their prices rise. So the average across all Americans, according to the Energy and Information Administration, which is a federal agency that looks at this stuff, is 7%. All of us are paying 7% more on average this year as compared to last year. And that's because these data centers create incredible amounts of demand for more power and drive up the cost of that power. It's not just that they are navigating or negotiating these long-term access deals that drive up prices for everybody because it creates a scarcity of power for everybody else, but they also are creating so much of a peak demand on the local grid that local grid really has no choice but to install new wires and new poles and new power plants in some cases, because these buildings are, in the old days, you could reasonably assume that a data center like this was pulling about as much power as like a 2,000 home village. That was the estimate. And so in that case, however, you got to keep in mind that those 2,000 homes, in this case, basically no one's ever going to sleep. They're never turning the lights on. All the blenders are on. All the fridges are whirring. Everything's on all of the time. These things obey the 99.999% uptime. The standard that engineers impose on this stuff mean that they are basically down about 5 minutes of the year just to swap out some hardware quick. They don't go down. And as a result, that peak demand is higher all of the time. There's no scooting things around or storing up battery power and giving it out when you need it. It is always going to be there. So they have to turn up greater capacity, and that makes it more expensive for all of us. And so the thing is, though, right? So if in the old days it was that, a single data center was about 2,000 homes. Well, there's a very alarming Washington Post story that just came out about the next generation of data centers. And a guy named Michael Thomas, who created an energy research firm called CleanView, he wrote on X the other day that while current data centers, quote, used as much power as a small town, today's are expected to use as much as a city with 500,000 people. One building, 500,000 people's worth of electricity. But the largest ones, he says, could use as much power as Philadelphia, population 5.7 million. So these data centers are growing and growing and growing. This is why, of course, we're seeing, so what's the political pushback against this? We've talked a little bit about the state pushback, but there's increasing federal pushback, right? So 3 Democratic senators this week announced that they're going to conduct an investigation into the rising electricity prices for average Americans. They wrote that tech companies should, quote, pay their fair share of their electricity rates and a greater share of the cost upfront for future energy usage. And Bernie Sanders has even gone as far as calling for a moratorium on AI data centers, which of course made the Silicon Valley and the White House boosters of them, Silicon Valley AI people and the White House boosters of them crazy. So you had Elon Musk calling Bernie a taker and saying they'll always follow the makers. And you had David Sachs saying that he's helping China win the AI race. But then you've got other weird political bedfellows who are on Bernie's side. Ron DeSantis, remember him? He hates this stuff and has been legislating against it so that Floridians don't have to play host to these data centers. So it's a very interesting political moment. Still, this week the House passed something called the SPEED Act, or at least pushed it forward. The SPEED Act is supposed to speed up federal rules when it comes to reviewing what it takes to put in new energy projects, including new data centers. And we've also seen that some companies are really just starting to look abroad because they don't want to have to deal with the laws here around that stuff. Malaysia, for instance, is becoming a place that people really want these data centers to go. We've seen OpenAI is going to make big investments abroad. The Stargate project that was supposed to bring a bunch of AI infrastructure here and may still do so there's now a Stargate in the Middle East where they're building this stuff. So people are starting to look abroad for these kinds of things. And yet the last thing I'll sort of leave you with here is that one sort of added complication here is that the business of building data centers is turning out to maybe be not as reliable a business as possible. It reminds me a little bit of sports stadiums and the ways in which people wind up stuck with a kind of useless building once it's outlived its usefulness. And the, tax incentives and so forth that get put in place and the real estate that gets committed to these things winds up sort of being a waste for the municipality. And in this case, we're talking very much about that because the leasing arrangements that are involved here seem to be making some of the more experienced investors kind of squirrely. So the biggest private backer of Oracle's efforts to build AI data centers just backed out of a big deal in Michigan. They were going to put billions into that. And according to the Financial Times, the lenders, quote, pushed for stricter leasing and debt terms amid shifting market sentiment around enormous AI spending. And there's a very interesting interview from a guy named Fernando Leon, who he's a big billionaire real estate developer. And he was just on CNBC this week saying that he's staying out of the AI data center business entirely. That real estate sector he doesn't want to be part of at all, even as other big competitors of his are getting into it. And he says it's because they're not building them themselves. These, Google and the rest, they're not building them themselves. What they're doing is they're getting outside companies to hold on to the debt and the risk. And they're just leasing the capacity from those companies rather than taking it on themselves. So Fernando Leon said, I see large technology companies, the largest companies on the planet with $4 trillion market cap saying, I don't want to own this asset. I don't want to have this on my balance sheet. This is him still talking. So I ask why? Why doesn't the largest company in the world want to own its own asset? And I think by extension, I would ask, why does that company also expect that a municipality would want to play host to something that they don't want on their books themselves? So there you go. You can read more about this. I have a big column up at Hard Reset, hardresetmedia.com. I have a column going there. And thanks a lot for watching. The Rip Current is produced and created by me, Jacob Ward. And if you liked this show and you want more content like this, go to theripcurrent.com, where I publish a weekly newsletter that covers these same sorts of stories of the big invisible forces that have us all in their grip. And if you want to really do me a favor, if you could go to where you have listened to this or watched it and like it, share it, or even better, review it. Holy cow, is that helpful? It's the best possible way for me to find a new audience. I really appreciate you being here. Thanks for listening.